The story of Leonardo da Vinci starts in Vinci, Italy, on April 15, 1452. He was born as an illegitimate son of 25-year-old notary Ser Piero, and his mother was a peasant girl named Caterina. Some sources do claim she was actually Ser Piero's slave, but it's more understood that she was just a mere peasant. Continuing on the topic of his father, Leonardo was taken in by him when he was first born, and whenever he became 15 years old, he was made an apprentice to Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence, Italy, until 1477. Even when he was an apprentice, he showed extreme talent to his master from 1470 to 1475, with pieces such as Baptism of Christ, which was his first project. Within that first project, he was supposed to paint an angel within the painting that supposedly Leonardo was so exceedingly talented that Verrocchio vowed to never paint again. When 1482 came around, he worked for Duke Millian because he needed to find a living after working for Verrocchio. Consequently, he had to abandon his commissions in Florence, and after 17 years of servitude to Millian, he only left after Duke Ludovico Sforza's fall from power in 1499. During such years is when Leonardo reached new heights of scientific and artistic achievement. During the period from 1485 to 1490, Leonardo created studies on 6 different subjects: flying machines, geometry, mechanics, municipal construction, canals, and architecture. He invested this time in researching advanced weapons such as tanks and other war vehicles and various combat machines, sometimes even submarines. He ended up producing his first anatomical studies around that period as well. But though he did so much, Leonardo left many of his projects unfinished. This was because he had dizzying amounts of interest. As a direct result of that, within 17 years he only completed 6 projects, 2 of which include The Last Supper and The Virgin on the Rocks. An example of a work he didn't finish was a piece known as The Big Horse. But with all that work, there was no doubt he had pastimes, which included locking himself up in his workshop for days on end. What he did while locked up in his workshop included cutting up and dissecting bodies while pondering over universal truths. When he wasn't performing autopsies, Leonardo was observing the world around him. From the years 1490 through 1495, Leonardo da Vinci started to keep accurate illustrated notes of his studies. Such studies were on painting, architecture, the elements of mechanics, and the human anatomy. After 1499, for 16 years, Leonardo searched for new patrons. This caused him to travel throughout Italy for his employees. One of such travels was with the Borgia's army, where he worked as a military engineer from 1500 to 1503. For a man who claimed to be a pacifist, he worked quite a bit on military projects. Now, his most famous work, the Mona Lisa, was done somewhere during the period from 1503 to 1519. It was painted on a wooden panel, using oil as a paint while he stayed in Florence, Italy. When the year 1513 came around, Leonardo transferred himself over to Rome to continue his studies. He maintained a workshop and did many projects for the Pope, but the Pope did not approve of his studies on human anatomy and physiology. As a direct consequence, the Pope forbade him from dissecting humans. So without having any humans to experiment on, his progress halted, severely limiting his information. It wasn't the only problem he had with the churches. When Leonardo was 24 years old, he was arrested, along with his friends, on charges of sodomy. The case was later dropped due to a lack of evidence and the fact no one came forward to testify against the men. Later in his journals, Leonardo reveals how truly frightened for his life he was, because in 15th century Florence, Italy, sodomy was punishable by death. Not long after the incident, Leonardo fled Florence, fearing for his life. Following the death of one of his patrons at the time, Giuliano de' Medici, in March of 1516, Leonardo was offered the title of premier painter and engineer and architect of the king by Francis I in France. He ended up being his most generous patron, while also being his last. From there on, Francis I provided Leonardo with a stipend and manor house near the royal Chantier at Amboise. Around that time, Leonardo suffered from paralysis in his right hand, supposedly caused by recurrent strokes. Even with the paralysis, Leonardo still persevered, continuing his work with his left hand. Also, he taught students as well as conduct studies on cats, horses, dragons, St. George, anatomical studies, studies on the nature of water, drawings of deluge, and other various machines. Sadly, all great men must face the same fate, no matter how talented or intelligent they may be. So on May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci succumbed to his death, perishing in Cloutes, France, and legend has it that Francis I held Leonardo in his arms until he died, holding his friend until the bitter end.